to be in Philadelphia. I first came to Philadelphia when I was 19 years old, had never been to the East Coast, to be an intern at the Philadelphia Inquirer in the sports department. And all of us 19, 20, 21-year-old college interns lived together in a big old creaky house just off the Penn campus. There were serious hijinks going on in that house. And I distinguished myself that summer at the Inquirer, which I don't know. The Inquirer is one of the legendary newspapers, and it was hard. It was competitive. There were like 18 interns, and so I distinguished myself for two achievements that summer. The first one was I took on the king of the hot dogs. He was a legendary Veterans Stadium hot dog vendor, who supposedly held the all-time record for hot dogs sold per hour at Phillies games. And so I naively thought that my experience selling hot dogs for the Boy Scouts at War Memorial Stadium in Little Rock, Arkansas, would make me qualified to take on the king and get the record. So, well, first of all, I could not compete with the king's voice. Selling hot dogs is all about the voice. The voice has to be heard 2 sections over. This man could project the word hot dog to hungry people 20 rows up, 2 sections away. So I couldn't compete with that. But the main thing that slowed me down, I could not manage this bulky hot dog carrying case that had boiling hot water in the case. You're walking around the stadium trying to manage it. You're up and down on the steps. It's serious hot dog vending in Philly. And so we didn't have that in Arkansas. And I was so out of it, I was trying to spear these hot dogs out of the water, slather relish and mustard on them, and I almost got beamed with a Greg Luzinski foul ball. Does anybody know Greg Luzinski? Anyway, at any rate, even though I was outpointed by the king of the hot dogs, I think he sold something like 450 hot dogs, and I sold like maybe 60 or 70. So even though I was humiliated by the Vet Stadium hot dog king, the resulting article was popular. And so by the end of the summer, they assigned me to be the daily reporter for the Phillies for road games only. I couldn't do it. They sent me on road games with the Phillies because they wanted me to cover that last surge when the Phillies were expected to charge back from being 37 and a half games out of first place. No. So I would go to, say, Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati, and all the local baseball reporters would all write columns about how the Phillies were so bad that year, the newspaper was sending children to cover the game. And then they would interview me about how I got the job, because obviously there were hundreds of guys who wanted to cover the last place team in the National League. But anyway, I digress, but I have very fond memories of Philadelphia and fond memories of the Inquirer, and so I really appreciate this invitation from one of the great cultural institutions of America, the Free Library of Philadelphia. It really is. They just handed me, they wanted me to mention that they have movies here all the time. They have a movie night, and on January 20th, they're showing the Hudsucker Proxy. You guys know that film, the Coen Brothers comedy with Tim Robbins and Paul Newman and Jennifer Jason Leigh. Great movie. On February 17th, they're showing The Passionate Friends. Does anybody know that movie? That is David Lean, early David Lean, the guy who did Dr. Zhivago and Lawrence of Arabia, but very early David Lean, and it's an H.G. Wells romantic drama, H.G. Wells novel, romantic drama. And then Black Narcissus on March 17th. Does anybody know that movie? That's I call that stuff nunsploitation. I like movies about nuns, and this is about the nuns living up in the Himalaya mountains where they get some repressed desires. And so it's actually a classic movie. So anyway, come to movie night at the Free Library of Philadelphia. I don't normally speak in the afternoon. I don't normally speak at such esteemed institutions so much. I am going to try to watch my language. I don't know, are there any children here? Because if there are, I will watch my language. Okay, there are too. So, okay. I'm trying to stay on the subject. But before we get to the movie, I want to talk a little bit about books, and I want to talk about the amazing company that published my recent book, Dark Horse, which is Dark Horse. They're mostly known for comic books, but they're based in Portland, Oregon. And what the wizards at Dark Horse did is they took my 1987 cheap paperback on pulp paper, and they turned it into a 2025 expensive 30-pound coffee table art book on paper made from the skin of babies. They got that book so dressed up that when it was first listed on Amazon, it actually trended ahead of the latest Stephen King release, which was obviously some kind of masterful manipulation of algorithms to create a fake result. So, all last year, I was milking that everywhere I went. Horror conventions, live shows, I would tell the fans, pre-order this book, even if you can't afford it, because the book is so expensive, you have to decide whether to buy a new car or buy this book. And so, pre-order the book, and then cancel your order later so I can continue to trend ahead of Stephen King. And so, people actually did that, and then some of them forgot to cancel their order and had to sell their car. So, anyway, this company took my hastily written early articles and turned them into these actual artifacts that will be cursed loudly by their future owners every time they have to move and realize how big this freaking book is. So, before I introduce the movie, I want to do a quick reading from the foreword of the book. I haven't done an actual reading. They don't invite you to do readings anymore. They used to have those in bookstores all the time. Not so much anymore. In fact, I think the last reading I did was in Seattle, and the reason I remember it is it was with Hunter S. Thompson. He was also reading that night. They had this famous story about a fish market in Seattle, and they said to me, okay, Hunter's going to go first and then you. And I said, no. No way I'm following Hunter. And they said, well, you have to, because we just got him sober enough to do 15 minutes. And then he's going to pass out. And so I did go first. And of course, that was a huge mistake, because Hunter was entertaining even when he was living on another planet. So, and I don't think he even knew whose book he was reading. But great man, though. Hunter used to send me pictures of stuff that he was blowing up. He would blow stuff up and try to take photography, great photography of the moment that it explodes into a million pieces. And stuff that he would blow up with his shotgun. Kind of a tradition. So I miss Hunter. And I miss him sending me those exploding shotgun photos. That was like a hobby of his. Anyway, I'm going to read this short thing, and then we're going to watch one of the great indie movies of the past half century. It really is. This is from the foreword of the book, and it kind of explains why I do what I do. On a certain day in 1981, I walked into Ron Smith's office, and I said, I want to review drive-in movies. And Smith was he was a Philadelphian, actually. He was this mischievous guy from Philadelphia with a dry wit, and somehow he had landed as the entertainment editor at the Dallas Times-Herald. And instantly, he knew what I meant. He said, you mean all that stuff we'd never review? And I said, yeah. He says, you mean the horror and the sex and the rednecks blowing each other up with dynamite and all that stuff? And I said, exactly. And he says, they're never going to go for it. And they were the high sheriffs. And the high sheriffs at the Dallas Times-Herald at that time were basking in their temporary ascendance as the brave new warriors of American journalism. And I told Ron, I said, I have this theory. I don't think newspaper editors read the paper. And I especially don't think they read our section of the paper. I think they read the front page and the front sports page, and then they go home. So we don't announce it. We don't promote it. We don't put it on the front of any section. We just publish it. And Ron goes, back pages of Weekend magazine? And that was his instantaneous stealth plan. He said, discount furniture ads, the ink comes off on your hands, sometimes falls out of the newspaper because it's so loosely assembled by the printing press. Yeah, I love it. And so Joe Bob Goes to the Drive-In was born, and it was stuffed into the back of the Weekend Friday supplement. The first column on January 15th, 1982, was an extremely brief review of an Italian movie called The Grim Reaper. Although at the time I had no idea it was Italian. That's how good the dubbing was in Rome. And I would have been further surprised if I had heard the actual title of the movie, which was Anthropophagus. I don't know why they changed that when they put it at the drive-in. Anthropophagus. Joe D'Amato, the listed director, was using one of his 25 fake names. His real name was Aristide Mesachesi, and it was totally lost on me that the star, Tisa Farrow, was the sister of Mia Farrow, and that was the main reason she got star billing in the movie. But despite my lack of drive-in expertise at the time, the column became a sensation within about 3 weeks. Infamous both with the general public, because the Times-Herald was always, we were the scrappy working man's newspaper, unlike the bigger, better funded Dallas Morning News. And more ominously, it became infamous within the newsroom. So the next time I went into Ron Smith's office, he said, "Sit down." And I sat down, and he said, "I'm getting questions about this column." I said, "Like?" I said, "Well, who is this Briggs guy, and why are you letting him get away with this? It's not a good image for the Times-Herald." And I said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And he says, "Not a thing, just don't dial it up any higher. Leave it where it is for the time being." 3 months later, we had our third and final conference about the column. And I said, "So did the high sheriffs ever notice?" He says, "As far as I can tell, they still haven't read it. So you were right about that." And I said, "What happens when they do read it?" He says, "Nothing, now it's too famous to kill." So the reason I'm going into detail about this is that if you read these early primitive columns, you'll be amazed that they could have caused any controversy at all. But it was a different time. Exploitation movies were considered disposable trash. Horror movies especially were either ignored or reviled by the mainstream press. And I was part of the mainstream press at the time. Very early in the game, I got letters of condemnation from the Baptist Church, the National Organization for Women, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, the Catholic League, film critics in other cities who thought what I was doing was deplorable, and especially from this guy, the Reverend Donald Wildman. The Reverend Donald Wildman was the founder of the National Federation for Decency in Tupelo, Mississippi. And in later years, the Reverend and I would share the microphone at many seminars and public forums, and we always had the same topic. Can movies and TV shows cause crime? And I remember one convention in particular, and I'm watching Reverend Wildman, and in the middle of making one of his arguments for censorship, I had this dawning realization, he really does believe what he's saying. He really does believe that drive-in movies are breeding an underclass of rapists, murderers, and terrorists. And so after that, I had more respect for him. He was an honest man. He was sticking to his principles. And I miss it. He's passed away now, but I miss him. But it wasn't so much the plots of the movies themselves that bothered people. Most of the critics never even watched one of these movies. Most of the movies had square-up endings in which evil behavior is punished. My sin was my fierce advocacy of films that showed close-up violence, that celebrated sexual freedom, or that somehow went, quote, over the line. If I had a nickel for every time somebody gave me that over the line speech, I'd have 1,000,000 nickels, because I always insisted that my inquisitors show me that line, show me the place where good taste ends and bad taste begins. Because if you hate the film, you say that film is full of sex and violence. But if you like the film, you say it's full of romance and adventure. And so when I started writing these columns, the term popular culture had just been invented. There was some academics at Bowling Green State University invented the term pop culture, popular culture. Most newspapers had a classical music critic, but no rock critic, no pop music critic, and journalists were still instructed to, quote, write for a family audience, meaning make everything G-rated. And most film critics were just ignored by the public because they didn't really have the same taste as the average moviegoer. The most influential critic in America at that time was probably Gene Shalit. Remember him, the wisecracking, mustachioed, bushy-haired comic relief character on the Today Show? You know, a typical Gene Shalit review was about 4 sentences long and amounted to either I liked it or I hated it. You know, he was everybody's best friend spreading yes or no votes, you know. And people would go, I think I'll check that out. The goofy guy with the paintbrush mustache says he had a good time, you know. So when I started writing the columns, I was determined to be a populist in both style and commitment. I was not just going to idly recommend movies on my way to the studio in Rockefeller Center. I was going to shout from the rooftop of a grindhouse in Times Square. So in the South, where I was born and raised, the equivalent of the grindhouse was the drive-in. Now they were family entertainment centers, according to the owners, but they were passion pits, according to those who wanted to shut them down because of the number of girls getting impregnated in the back seats of muscle cars during the Roger Corman triple feature. The drive-ins always celebrated an outlaw culture. They attracted an outlaw clientele, and even in the golden days of let's go to the lobby, you know, dancing hot dog trailers and stuff like that, drive-ins were bathed in the aura of seedy motels and cheap diners. Nobody ever got dressed up to go to a drive-in. 44 years later, I'm still reviewing drive-in movies, and I'm still getting flack for it. I have been picketed, pilloried, fired, canceled, shunned by both the right and the left, depending on who I was writing for at any given time. When I started, I always described my philosophy this way. Satire is like a machine gun on a swivel. You fire at every target you can find, without regard for the target's popularity, and about 1 in 20 targets will scream. So you fire at them 20 more times. That's how you identify the sacred cows in our culture, and that's how you destroy the sacred cows in our culture. Sadly, this is no longer the case. I don't do this anymore because a majority of Americans now believe that there are sacred cows and there should be sacred cows. I used to go on talk radio a lot. And many of the hosts would say, you know, I may hate what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. That axiom was so common, it was almost a cliche. Everybody said it. That no longer exists. No one will defend anyone's right to say anything. Everybody adds, well, up to a point, you know, up to that line. My best friends in the world constantly warn me to stay away from certain topics, including the president! It used to be the sacred duty of every satirist and comedian to make fun of the president. I started writing professionally when I was 13 years old, so I was able to make fun of Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush 1, Clinton, Bush 2, but then something changed. Making fun of Obama made you a reactionary dinosaur. Making fun of Trump made you a whiny liberal know-nothing. You know, making fun of Biden, that was being a Trump enabler or something. You know, there's nobody out there saying, hey, he's a satirist, that's his job, he makes fun of the president. Every joke is now pregnant with malicious intent. So the public perception of these columns has constantly ping-ponged back and forth from, I love Joe Bob because he drinks beer and he hangs out with regular people and he tells it like it is, to I hate Joe Bob because he can't shut his mouth about stuff we shouldn't talk about. I got flack. Just, did any of you see the Christmas show? The Christmas I got flack for talking about how you shouldn't take away the money for Meals on Wheels after 70 years of funding. There were people saying, we know what you're trying to say. Yeah, I was saying we should fund Meals on Wheels. People have to eat. My only defense is that I took all my inspiration and my principles from the drive-in. The drive-in is a uniquely American institution. There's a few drive-ins sprinkled around the rest of the globe, but insignificant number. The drive-in celebrates the car, especially the fast car, the convertible, the car with no muffler, the car representing freedom. And it celebrates the film underworld, the outlaw topics that the big studios and the big streaming services won't touch. And even in places that have no drive-ins, the word drive-in has become a genre. It means movies your mama doesn't want you to watch. And the drive-in is outdoors, it's communal, everybody is equal once you drive through that ticket gate. And most of all, the drive-in is the dwelling place of the individual, the nonconformist, the person outside the system. And this is true of the drive-in owners and the drive-in patrons and the producers of the drive-in films. The drive-in is a place where you're free to be funky. So, I'm reprinting this book so that people familiar with me today will see how it all evolved organically, how the drive-in totals came to be, how the real-life observations merged with the film criticism, how the attitudes that were birthed in the back seats of cars at now forgotten Texas drive-ins converged with conversations in the greater culture that we're still having today. The book has been expanded enormously since that 1987 edition, and what we put back in was the columns and the letters that were omitted from that book, and we put them back in to illustrate the birth process of this monster that I eventually had to wrestle with as I became, quote, the world's only drive-in movie critic, my standard introduction. And then it evolved through 20,000 hours of cable TV and live stage shows that were sometimes picketed. I sometimes come to the Colonial Theater in Phoenixville. And I've never been ticketed there, I'm proud to say. Film festivals and punk clubs and movie palaces and articles for publications as varied as Newsweek and Film Comment, the New York Times News Service, Playboy. And then it became an ongoing platform for my efforts to make satire healthy again, and in the process bring some humor and some kindness back to American journalism. So I'm happy I'm able to talk about that in the city that represents freedom and the library that represents the soul of this city, because I'm dedicating this book to everybody trying to break free to get funky. Okay? So, this movie today is an installment in my 5,000 movie tour of geeky exploitation films. I do this with the cooperation of the American Genre Film Archive, based in Austin, Texas, which saves and restores and preserves films that the Motion Picture Academy doesn't give a flying duck about. And today we are honoring a film that absolutely no one wanted to make, no one wanted to support it once it came out, and yet it survived and it thrived and it lives on today in theaters like this one where we all have really bad taste. So, in fact, if you don't want your friends to know where you're going, now you can say, I'm going to a genre film festival. The idea of a genre film festival is relatively recent. I don't even like the term genre film. Gone with the Wind is a genre film. It's from the genre called antebellum South movies that are so long they have to put a bathroom break in the middle. But when I first started reviewing genre films in the 80s, they were just exploitation films. That's what they were, but they were considered disposable trash beneath the contempt of most critics. So I'm happy to see that we're bringing glory to these guys who at one time would have been considered degenerate hacks. Not that I have anything against degenerate hacks. Some of my best friends are degenerate hacks. Anyway, what I missed most about the outlaw exploitation era, the 70s and the 80s, is the great titles. You know, The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and of course all those one-worders that just summed up perfectly what was about to happen on the screen. Jaws, Maniac, Madman. And I watched many of those films at the drive-in, attracted by the lurid newspaper ads. Now, young filmmakers, and we have some young filmmakers. In fact, we have Adam Carolla, the writer of Clown in a Cornfield. Where are you, Adam? You guys like Clown in a Cornfield? Anyway, young filmmakers are ashamed to do the exploitation things today. Last year I went to this festival in Kansas City where I thought I'd found one of my favorite titles of all time. Put your hands over the ears of that youngster back there. And the title was, Every Time We Meet for Ice Cream, Your Face Explodes. Okay, cool, I want to see that movie. And then I found out it's based on a novella called Every Time We Meet at the Dairy Queen, Your Whole Fucking Face Explodes. Which is so much better title. You can meet at the Dairy Queen to do all kinds of things that don't involve ice cream. So he actually took one of the most unique titles of the past 30 years and ruined it by trying to improve it. So my advice to the young filmmakers in this audience would be, work on those titles, people. Nobody's going to see your poster. We're in the age of streaming. You're going to end up on an online menu. Got to use the word aardvark. You got to sell it with the title. And the movie today exemplifies that principle, because this movie has the intriguing title of Bubba Ho-Tep. Bubba meaning Southern good old boy, and Ho-Tep meaning descended from Egyptian royalty. Written and directed by the great Don Coscarelli of the Phantasm movies. From the original novella by Joe R. Lansdale, East Texas boy. Now, I want you to imagine Don Coscarelli going into the office of a Hollywood studio executive in the late 90s when he first got the inspiration to make this movie, and the executive says, okay, let's talk about it. What's the title? Bubba Ho-Tep. Okay, fine, we can change that title later, but what's this movie about? Well, the two main characters are 68 years old and 82 years old. So if the movie mogul doesn't have a heart attack at that moment, he says, okay, tell me about these elderly characters. Okay, 80% of the movie is in a depressing nursing home. Okay, and we're going to art direct it with a lot of browns and dark greens to make it sad and oppressive. Okay, and the 68-year-old guy in the nursing home is Elvis. Okay, and so it's a musical. We're going to have some Elvis songs. Elvis songs are always good. No, we can't afford any real Elvis songs. It's just Elvis without any songs. Okay, so what is Elvis going to do? Well, Elvis has a giant tumor on his penis that has to be drained once a day by exploding it like a pimple. Okay. And his only friend in the world is a black man who believes he's JFK and that they kept him alive by putting sawdust in the back of his brain and dyeing his whole body black, and they control him from a secret room in the White House. And the executive at this point might say something like, okay, so there's a comic relief character who is crazy and is also a patient in this health facility. And Don would have to say, no, actually we want people to believe by the end of the movie that he really is President John F. Kennedy. Even though he's not. But the other character you described as equally delusional because he thinks he's Elvis. No, he's really Elvis. He's like an Elvis impersonator. No, he's the real Elvis, believed by people in the nursing home to be an Elvis impersonator, because Elvis at one time in his life started impersonating an Elvis impersonator. And what happens between these two guys? They make a plan to kill a redneck mummy. So there's also a mummy in this nursing home. No, there's this cowboy Egyptian mummy roaming through the woods of East Texas, sucking the souls out of weak people. Sucking their souls. Yes, sucking their souls out through their sphincters. And what else does this mummy do? Well, he uses the visitor's bathroom at the nursing home to carve obscene graffiti and hieroglyphics on the walls of the stalls while he's ridding himself of the residue of the people he's eaten. So this is sort of a raunchy comedy? No, we were planning on playing it straight. We do have one comic sequence about Elvis and JFK loving ding-dongs, but other than that, it's a straightforward Elvis and JFK fight a reanimated Egyptian mummy to the death with wheelchairs and walkers historical paranormal docudrama. So if we have an exceptionally polite Hollywood executive, and Don manages to get this far in the conversation, the executive might say something like, so you're making grumpy old Ghostbusters. And Don would have to say, no, it's more like non-lethal weapon. The weapon of choice being a bedpan and a walker. Elvis uses his walker to fight the mummy. And then the executive would have to say, please leave my office. Now, when most indie filmmakers get the please leave my office message, especially if they get it from everybody in town, that's the end of the project. But Don Coscarelli is not most indie filmmakers. Don Coscarelli, if you look at all his films, could best be described as the man whose plots can never be described. And believe me, I have tried. More to the point, his plots can never be completely understood. Lots of filmmakers talk about, quote, movie magic. And what they mean is technical tricks to create illusions. Don Coscarelli traffics in a different kind of movie magic, meaning he puts you in emotional places you didn't realize existed anywhere in this universe until he showed you what they look like. There are many ways I could describe Bubba Ho-Tep, which we're about to watch, and they would all be lame approximations. I could say it's a movie about aging. It's a movie about regret. It's a movie about redemption. It's a movie about supernatural monsters that represent the fear in all of us. When Joe Lansdale wrote this story in the early 90s, he announced to a friend that he had written something that could never be filmed. It didn't have a single commercial element in it, and it had everything in it that Hollywood hates. Well, Don Coscarelli proved him wrong. Don Coscarelli was told, get out of my office, by every movie executive in Hollywood, and then he decided to make it anyway. It is probably Bruce Campbell's greatest performance. And even though Ossie Davis has a minor supporting role, it shows him at the height of his powers in his 57th year as an actor. He made his first movie in 1945 when he came out of the Army. And if the musical score by Brian Tyler doesn't make you tear up at some point, then you have had your soul sucked out through your sphincter. It does all the things that Samuel Goldwyn said a movie should do. It makes you laugh, although it's not a comedy. It makes you cry, although it's not really a drama. It makes you root for a superhero, even though he's old and wrinkled and can't really handle the action sequences. And it makes you wonder how it could possibly end. It makes you care deeply about characters who are seriously flawed and damaged. I hope there's a few of you in the audience who haven't seen it yet. Are there? Oh, good. There's like at least 40 of you. So there's nothing more satisfying than watching Bubba Ho-Tep for the first time. It's kind of like having sex for the first time, you know? I don't know what that was, but I want more of it. Everybody who worked on this movie was doing it for the love of the project. Bruce Campbell was told not to do it by his agents and by his manager. Ossie Davis was told not to do it by his management. And since the budget was so low, they couldn't afford the elaborately tricked out supernatural mummy monster. So the guys at KNB Effects, the most revered special effects studio in Hollywood, created the mummy, animated the mummy, aged Bruce Campbell 25 years, and they did all that for the price of their materials. They worked for free. Don Coscarelli wrote a book called True Indie. This is the best example of it. They found an abandoned veterans care home in Downey, California, and they built most of their sets there. Brian Tyler, the composer, normally works with symphony orchestras when he does the Fast and the Furious movies or he does the Iron Man series, other big Hollywood projects. For this movie, Brian Tyler played every instrument on the soundtrack himself. And then when they finished, nobody wanted to distribute it, so they distributed it themselves. They struck 34 or 35 millimeter prints, and they took it across the country, one city at a time, using volunteer street teams to publicize it. And lo and behold, the people showed up and the people supported it, and here we are 20 plus years later, and it's just as fresh as it was on June the 9th, 2002, when it premiered at a film festival held at the Palms Casino Resort on the Las Vegas Strip. Notice I did not say the Sundance Film Festival, I said the Palms Casino Resort in Vegas. And by the way, I do want to meet everyone here that I have yet to meet, so I'll be at the signing table after. I think we're going to have a Q&A right after the movie, but then I'll be at the signing table. We do have to get out of here about 4:30, 4:40, because the library closes at 5. But right now, let's take a look at those drive-in totals. We have 6 dead bodies, 1 undead body, 4 breasts, 1 dead scarab beetle, 1 pecker growth, 1 rodeo mummy, 1 slow-mo Elvis posse walk, iron lung theft, fork stabbing, tongue ripping, wheelchair clubbing, giant bloodthirsty scarab beetles, exploding trailer house, hieroglyphic subtitles, profane hieroglyphic graffiti, mummy double torching, bedpan foo, walker foo, millennium flashback foo, space heater incineration foo. Drive-In Academy Award nominations for Bruce Campbell for doing a thoroughly convincing 68-year-old Elvis, while kung-fuing giant scarab beetles and delivering lines like, I felt my pecker flutter once like a pigeon having a heart attack. Ella Joyce as the nurse who has to don latex gloves and apply the white goo to Elvis's crotch. Reggie Bannister as the nursing home administrator who says, Miss Fiddlestein is waiting on her enema. Ossie Davis as the patient who thinks he's JFK, who shows off his drawer full of ding-dongs and baby Ruths and says, let's get decadent. Bob Ivy, the veteran stuntman in the title role, and Don Coscarelli, the writer-director, for doing things the drive-in way. 4 stars. Joe Bob says check it out, and God bless Philly.